Alright, guys, so the screws are starting to tighten once again, and let's talk about the economic war today. This is your financial Armageddon update, and we're going to take you through the end of the world as you know it, one video at a time. Now, we are not even at the US elections yet, and the US they want to push their allies to hammer China. And this time, the eye of Sauron has fallen on Japan. This situation is very dangerous. It reveals how the US can use their economy and their own set of rules to pressure the world. It might be China today, but it could be any other country tomorrow. US lawmakers are pressing Japan to escalate their technology curbs on China. Both Democrats and Republicans are telling Japan to contain China now. And if they don't, Japanese companies could face punishments from the US itself. And this sounds more like a threat than a request or a recommendation. The US could impose sanctions or pull away any semiconductor subsidies to Japanese companies. Now, Japan has been behind the technology game in many sectors. They are well behind the solar game as well as electric vehicles, so they are playing catch up in semiconductors today. Rapidus is a Japanese chip startup that Tokyo is pouring a ton of money into. In April alone, Japan gave the company nearly $4 billion in subsidies. Just like China, the EU, and the US, Japan is now neck deep in the subsidy war. The amount of money they pledged to reshore chip companies is simply staggering. Japan has set aside 4 trillion yen or $27 billion to subsidize chip companies coming to Japan. This could reach up to 10 trillion yen, over 600 billion to Rapidus and nearly a trillion to TSMC. US giant Micron is also being lured to Japan with a ton of subsidies. The US telling Japan to contain China really opens up a serious dilemma. It's a lose-lose situation no matter what Japan chooses to do. Now, if Japan decides to listen to US chip sanctions now, they will have to listen to more orders tomorrow, the classic sunk cost fallacy. And that would mean ending up like Intel and Nvidia not being able to sell advanced chips to China. And that places enormous pressure on their revenues. And how will that benefit Rapidus and the other chip fabs coming to Japan? It really doesn't. And let's not forget who's the biggest consumer of chips in the world. China accounts for 55% of the Asia Pacific market and 31% of global market share. Japan, following US orders, will just land them in hot soup. They'll be spending trillions of yen in subsidies and risk cutting themselves away from the biggest single market for chips. However, if Japan doesn't comply, companies like Tokyo Electron could face sanctions themselves. The US still has an ace in the hole they can pull. The Foreign Direct Product Rule or the FDPR is a remnant of US Cold War policy. It allows Washington to impose their will on companies. So if you use a certain percentage of American inputs in your products, you can be subjected to US foreign policy. Almost all chip factories in the G7 contains tools and products from US suppliers. So America can indeed force Japan to comply. And we are fast approaching the deadline when Tokyo has to choose. Do they listen wholesale to US orders or do they ignore it and still continue business with China? Because either way, their industries are going to get clobbered. The value-added chip supply chain is still dominated by the US, and this is especially true for the design of advanced AI chips. The US controls almost 70% of the market here. In manufacturing equipment, almost half is under US direct control as well. This is problematic because Japan wants to build the most advanced chips of 2 nanometers. They'll need equipment, designs, and IPs from the US, and that includes hiring US chip engineers and opening branches in the country itself. It's not easy for Japan to just ditch US orders and sell to China. They are risking not just Tokyo Electron but the future of Japanese chip making. Now, back in September, China warned Japan of severe economic retaliation for their chip curbs. This isn't an empty threat. The future of automakers in Japan is also under extreme risk. China warned that they could cut Japan's access to critical minerals needed for the auto industry. And this includes rare earths like lithium, cobalt, nickel, and graphite. Beijing controls the entire supply chain, especially in refining and production. So if China restricts critical exports to Japan, automakers they can just kiss goodbye to electric vehicles. Costs will soar through the roof. So Japan is getting squeezed from both the US and China, and either way they will face economic pain. There's another threat also looming in the distance. Trump is on his way to the Oval Office, and he has promised once again to tear up the Nippon Steel deal. He's going to block the Japanese acquisition of US steel.
I saw a man from a big steel company and he was devastated. I knew him for a long time. And it's been a tough business. It was a great business many years ago. And I would not let U.S. steel be sold to Japanese, by the way. It's psychologically, I think it would be.
That's the Nippon Steel, as you know.
Yeah, I wouldn't let it be sold. But I would stop it if it hasn't been completed by the time I'm president, because I think it sets a horrible tone.
So Japan now has to choose between the art of the deal or the Chinese dragon. Either way, it's a hard decision. But let's talk about Russia and Ukraine for a bit, because if there's one imminent flashpoint that could collapse everything, this is it. Zelensky has floated his new victory plan idea, and it's a really hard sell. Even people in the West, they're quite hesitant. But what's frightening is his follow-up statement. He wants either NATO or nukes, and this is frightening on all levels. It will push Russia to double down even more on the conflict. Remember what Russia's security concerns are. One of the terms for peace Moscow demands is Ukraine's neutrality. So how is NATO membership or acquiring nuclear weapons going to help end the war? According to Zelensky, either Ukraine will have nuclear weapons and that will be our protection, or we should have some sort of alliance. Apart from NATO, today we do not know any effective alliances. NATO membership is the preferred option, of course, and not nukes. It's important to realize what Ukraine and NATO face in 2025. The market odds of Trump winning are over 60%. And when Trump met Zelensky, it was very obvious Trump wants to end the war.
Could very well happen, but I think the president said it the best. This is a war that should have never happened. It should have never happened, and it wouldn't have happened. It's a shame, but this is a war that should have never happened, and we'll get it solved. It's a complicated puzzle, very complicated puzzle, but we'll get it solved, and people get on with their lives. Too many people dead, too many beautiful cities. I've seen those cities are so beautiful, and that, I don't know how you can ever rebuild them the way they were. It's not possible.
This is what you call the ultimate non-committal speech. You can just see the frustration on Zelensky's face. And a big shout out to our sponsor today, Indigo Precious Metals. When it comes to investing in gold and silver, I trust Indigo Precious Metals in Singapore. They have made buying precious metals safe, fast, and easy for investors, whether you're making small purchases or large-scale investments. With gold prices steadily rising, ensuring you buy authentic gold at competitive prices is crucial. And as inflation shows no sign of slowing down, precious metals continue to be a reliable store of value. Whether you're purchasing by the ounce, the kilo, or saving up by the gram, Indigo Precious Metals helps you maximize your investment no matter your budget. The best part, you can test your coins or bars on site, giving you complete peace of mind. As a leading retailer and bullion dealer in Singapore for gold, silver, and platinum, they are your go-to source. If you're considering your first gold, silver, or platinum purchase, there's no better place to begin than Indigo Precious Metals. For this month only, you can get a 100-ounce silver bar at less than 3% premium. Stocks are limited. So if you're looking to buy silver, this is a great promotion to really consider. And with my code Sean Fu, enjoy a further discount on your first purchase. So start building your gold and silver stack today. So we have to watch the elections very carefully. For all we know, we could see a settlement in 2025. Now, if Kamala wins, then we could see a continuation of the conflict. We even have France backing support for Ukraine's proposal. The plan doesn't just constitute joining NATO, a big portion also revolves around approving strikes deep into Russia. Now, we can imagine if Kamala wins, the victory plan could be implemented. Billions more will be sent, which of course is horrible for inflation going forward. Now, what's interesting is the fourth point of the victory plan. for the West to sign a special agreement for the common use and development of Ukraine's critical resources, and that includes trillions of dollars in lithium, graphite, and uranium. So there's a very big carrot being dangled to the West. Will the US really give up securing these minerals for their supply chains? Let's not forget the G7 is fighting an economic war with China, and that means securing critical supplies for various industries including EV, solar, and semiconductors is really a big lure, and I don't think the US can resist the temptation. But this really brings up a burning question. How long can the US continue funding endless wars? Congress is pushing the economy closer and closer towards default. And if you hold gold, this next update is great news for you. But for everyone else and the economy in general, it's terrible news. And here's how fast things are breaking down. The US deficit has officially hit $1.8 trillion, the highest since the 2020 lockdowns. Everything is soaring to the moon. Interest on the debt has exploded, obligations like Social Security are ballooning, and with two wars that rely on US money, defense spending will only rise higher. The biggest risk we face isn't really a market collapse, it's a meltdown where a ton of money is chasing a shrinking pool of goods and assets. And that's why stock prices and gold are soaring, and that's why inflation isn't crashing down fast enough. Just look at the trajectory we are on. Look at the trend. The world's biggest economy has lost control of their budget. Since 2000, after the dot-com crash, Congress began spending more and more money. Things went crazy after the housing collapse, and we went above $1 trillion a year. In 2020, the deficit hit over $2.5 trillion for 2 years in a row. A big part was money in the form of stimulus checks. You combine that with the lockdowns, and that's why we had an unthinkable inflation crisis. And we are facing the same risk once again. In 2023, the deficit hit 6.2% of GDP. This year, it's at 6.4%, a significant increase. Now, I don't want to be alarmist, but we are moving more towards the point of no return. If the US economy can outgrow its debt burden, then we can all argue that fiscal spending is productive. But that would mean the US economy in 2024 has to exceed 6.2% growth at the minimum. Then we can say the level of borrowing is sustainable. However, this is not really the case. In 2023, US real GDP came in at 2.5%. This is after factoring in inflation. It represents the true measure of growth in the US economy. So you are spending around 6% of GDP in deficits to drive real growth of 2.5%. It doesn't make any sense. What happened to over 3% of missing growth? There's a ton of wastage here. Obviously, the spending isn't 100% effective. The money is not generating enough economic activity. And this brings up a ton of questions. How long can this borrowing continue? It's crazy when we backtrack to last year when Fitch, they downgraded the US economy. They downgraded US credit rating from AAA down to AA+. It's even more troubling when even Yellen herself can't seem to admit the US has a spending and debt crisis.
Overall annual inflation has declined every month for the past year, and our economy continues to grow. In the longer term, the United States remains the world's largest, most dynamic, and most innovative economy, with the strongest financial system in the world. Fitch's decision is puzzling in light of the economic strength we see in the United States. I strongly disagree with Fitch's decision, and I believe it is entirely unwarranted.
When you bury your head under the sand, you get blind to the snowball effect of debt. When you spend so much, you are making the mountain bigger, and the Federal Reserve can't cut rates fast enough. They might just reignite inflation. Just the interest on the debt alone is the national emergency. Interest payments have hit 1.1 trillion for the year, and this accounts for nearly 4% of GDP, the highest since 1998. This is over $1 trillion the US doesn't have. It will have to be borrowed from bondholders all over the world. And this pushes the debt burden even higher. It's bringing forward the day of default. Remember guys, in 2025, the spending won't stop. The US is determined to contain China, and whether it's Harris or Trump, they will reshore industries back to the US. And this can't be done without spending hundreds of billions or even trillions. You have to throw a ton of subsidies to make it happen. So this debt tsunami isn't over. It's going to get worse and the waves are growing higher and higher. But let me know what you think. Will Japan listen to the US and is it all over for the US national debt? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.